The roots of the blue corn in my Shima Sani's, my maternal grandmother's, small, sun-baked backyard garden run deeper than the crumbling foundations of the house itself. I swear, some quiet evenings, when the city's cacophony momentarily subsides and the crickets begin their hesitant song, you can almost hear them. A low, resonant thrumming in the earth, a silent vibration whispering stories of resilience, of survival, of a people tethered to this specific patch of urban soil. Long before the sprawling city sprouted its concrete and steel tendrils around us, swallowing whole neighborhoods in its relentless expansion. Every spring, without fail, her gnarled, arthritic hands that have carded wool into submission, woven intricate, story-filled rugs that now hang as treasured heirlooms, and comforted generations of Yazzie children through fevers and heartaches, would press those precious, almost sacred blue corn seeds into the soil she'd lovingly, painstakingly nurtured for over 50 years in this very yard. That corn, its sturdy stalks reaching for the often indifferent, smog-tinged sky like prayer feathers offered to the holy people, was more than just sustenance. It was a living testament to our Diné heritage, a stubborn, vibrant patch of beauty and tradition flourishing defiantly in a neighborhood that was rapidly, and often callously, forgetting its own diverse, working-class past. My name is Yazzie. I'm 19, a student at the local community college when I can scrape together the tuition, a dreamer by nature, a pragmatist by necessity. And that small, weathered, two-bedroom house on Sycamore Street, with its perpetually peeling pale yellow paint, its slightly crooked porch where the swing Shichei, my grandfather, hung with such care before he walked on into the spirit world, wasn't just a rental unit in a city that increasingly saw us as invisible. It was the only home I'd ever truly known. It was the epicenter of my universe. It was where my mother, her two sisters, and my uncle were raised, their childhood laughter and tears still echoing faintly in the familiar creaks of the floorboards. It was where Shima Sani, her eyes holding the wisdom of deserts and mountains, told us stories of the Hueldi, the long walk, by the warm, comforting glow of the old wood stove in winter. Her voice a low, melodic chant that wove unspeakable sorrow and indomitable strength into a single, unbreakable thread of continuity. It was where the rich, savory scent of fry bread browning in hot oil and mutton stew simmering with chili and potatoes meant family, meant safety, meant belonging, meant hojo. That untranslatable Diné concept encompassing balance, beauty, harmony, and walking in the right way with all of creation. We weren't owners in the Bilagana white people's sense of paper deeds, mortgage statements, and property taxes, but we belonged to that house, and it, in a deeper, more essential way, belonged to us. Our roots were intertwined with its aging, uneven floorboards, our collective laughter and whispered secrets soaked into its faded plaster walls. For over 30 years, we'd had the same landlord, old Mr. Henderson. A different, kinder Henderson than the ones who often populate stories of indigenous struggle, though the name itself still sends a reflexive shiver down the spines of many Native families who have dealt with the BIA or other bureaucratic entities. He was a gruff, solitary, but fundamentally fair man, a retired plumber who had inherited a few rental properties and understood, in his own quiet way, our deep connection to the place. He'd seen my mother grow from a shy girl into a resilient woman there. He'd watched my brother Ashki and me take our first steps in that small yard. And for a modest, but always consistently paid, rent, he largely left us in peace, never complaining about the constant stream of relatives who found temporary shelter under our roof, or about Shima Sani's meticulously tended corn patch, which he knew was sacred ground, off limits to any casual intrusion. Then, last spring, Mr. Henderson, well into his 80s, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The letter, when it arrived a few weeks later, felt like a cold premonition. It was a crisp, impersonal, professionally printed envelope, bearing a new, unfamiliar corporate letterhead embossed in a severe, modern font. Sterling Peak Properties, LLC. It informed us, in sterile, almost threatening legalese, that the property at 127 Sycamore Street had been sold as part of Mr. Henderson's estate, and that our existing month-to-month tenancy agreement would be comprehensively reviewed by the new owner in due course. Due course felt ominous. A week after that unsettling letter, Mr. Alistair Finch III arrived. He didn't drive up in a dusty, work-worn pickup truck like Mr. Henderson used to. He glided silently to the curb in a gleaming black Tesla, a vehicle that looked as out of place on our street of aging bungalows and patched asphalt as a spaceship landed in a cornfield. He was tall, impeccably, almost unnaturally, dressed in a tailored European suit that probably cost more than our rent for an entire year, his silver gray hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes a pale, assessing, almost reptilian blue that seemed to take in our home's lived-in shabbiness, its comfortable clutter, with a distinct, almost palpable lack of warmth or human interest. He didn't offer a handshake when my mother opened the door, just a curt, dismissive nod that barely acknowledged her presence. "The Yazzie residence, I presume?" he said, his voice smooth, an educated East Coast drawl that held no trace of our city's diverse, working-class accents. He surveyed the porch with a slow, deliberate gaze, his eyes lingering for a moment on the slightly sagging railing where Ashki and I had carved our initials as children, then on the collection of well-loved, mismatched chairs where neighbors often gathered for evening chats. "Quite characterful," he pronounced, and the word in his mouth sounded less like a compliment and more like a diagnosis of a terminal condition. My mother, Sarah Yazzie, a woman of immense quiet dignity, who had weathered a lifetime of quiet struggles with an unbending grace, tried to be welcoming, to extend the courtesy that was so deeply ingrained in our Diné way. "Mr. Finch, thank you for coming by to introduce yourself. We've lived here a very long time, as you know. We've always been good tenants. Mr. Henderson could attest to that, were he still with us." Finch's smile was a brief, dismissive flash of perfectly white teeth, a purely performative gesture. "Yes, well, Sterling Peak Properties has a certain standard we aim to uphold for our rapidly expanding portfolio. We are looking at significant reinvestment in this particular neighborhood. Upgrades, modernization, bringing the entire block up to its full market potential, you understand." He gestured vaguely with a manicured hand towards Shima Sani's vibrant corn patch, already showing the first tender green shoots of spring. A flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, disdain, impatience, crossed his pale eyes. "Naturally," he continued, his voice taking on a brisk, all-business tone. "That will involve some rather substantial changes around here." The official eviction notice arrived exactly 1 week after that unsettling visit, delivered by a uniformed courier, as impersonal and cold as the man whose signature adorned the bottom. We had 60 days to vacate the premises. The reasons cited, in bold, unyielding type: substantial renovations and owner's intent to occupy for personal use. A lie. A blatant, transparent lie. We knew it was a lie. We'd heard the nervous whispers from other long-term tenants on our block, other working-class families, many of them Latino or Southeast Asian immigrants. Finch, through Sterling Peak Properties, was systematically buying up properties, evicting the existing residents, and planning to gut the houses, transforming them into luxury rentals or high-priced Airbnbs aimed at the young, affluent, predominantly white professionals who were increasingly discovering our charming, up-and-coming, read, rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. Our home, our history, our lives were just inconvenient obstacles to his relentless pursuit of profit margin. We were collateral damage in the urban gold rush, The panic that seized me was a cold, tight fist clenching around my heart, making it difficult to breathe. Where would we go? My mother worked 2, sometimes 3 low-wage jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store in the early mornings, just to keep us afloat. Shima-sani's Social Security pension was meager, barely enough for her medications. My younger brother, Ashki, a bright but often troubled 16-year-old, was still in high school, his future already precarious. My own part-time job at the downtown community library, shelving books and helping patrons, barely covered the cost of my college textbooks and bus fare. The rental market in the city had skyrocketed in recent years. Finding another place, any place that we could afford, a place large enough for our multi-generational family, a place that would even consider renting to a Diné family with a less-than-perfect credit history and no substantial savings, felt like an impossible, insurmountable task. This wasn't just an eviction. It was a deliberate displacement, a violent severing of roots, another painful chapter in the long, bitter, unending history of our people being pushed out, marginalized, made invisible, their connections to place systematically destroyed. My Shima-sani, when my mother gently, tearfully broke the news to her, took it with a quiet, heartbreaking stoicism that was almost harder to bear than open grief. She simply nodded, her ancient face a mask of serene resignation, and went out to sit on the porch swing, her gaze fixed on her precious corn, her lips moving in silent, ceaseless prayer. But I saw the tremor in her usually steady hands as she clutched her shawl tighter around her frail shoulders. I saw the dimming of the bright, mischievous light in her usually sparkling eyes. This house, this small patch of earth, was her anchor, her sanctuary, her tangible connection to She-Che, to her memories, to the continuity of her life. To lose it now, at her age, the thought was unbearable. My mother, Sarah, usually the unshakable pillar of our family, the one who always found a way, who always had a comforting word, finally broke down that night. She wept in Shima-sani's arms, deep, racking sobs that tore through the thin walls of our small home, a sound of such profound grief and helplessness that it fractured something inside me. Ashki, trying desperately to be the brave young man of the house, punched a hole in the flimsy drywall of his tiny bedroom, then sat on his bed with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The injustice of it all was a suffocating blanket, pressing down on us, stealing our breath. Finch, in his cold corporate calculus, didn't see us as a family, as human beings with history, with dignity, with deep roots in this community. He saw us merely as an inconvenient variable in his profit equation, a blight on his investment portfolio, an unsightly remnant of a past he was eager to erase and replace with something shinier, newer, and more lucrative. His prejudice, his disdain for people like us, was thinly, almost contemptuously, veiled behind the sterile, bloodless language of market potential, property enhancement, and necessary upgrades. He wanted our space, our home, but he clearly, emphatically didn't want us in it. We tried, of course, to reason with him, or at least with his slick, impersonal property management company, a faceless entity represented by a series of curt emails and condescending phone calls from a woman named Tiffany, who sounded perpetually annoyed. We offered to pay more rent, though we had no earthly idea how we'd actually manage it. We begged for more time, for a chance to find alternative housing. We highlighted Shima-sani's age and frail health, the disruption it would cause Ashki in his crucial junior year of high school. Our pleas, our desperate attempts at negotiation, were met with standardized form letters citing contractual obligations and the owner's prerogative, and with polite but firm, unyielding refusals from the ever-annoyed Tiffany. There was no room for compassion, no space for humanity, in Sterling Peak Properties' business model. It was my older cousin, Yazzie, His English name was David, but he preferred his Diné name. A young, fiery activist deeply involved with the local indigenous rights movement and a veteran of several environmental justice campaigns, who first suggested we fight back in a different, more public way. He'd come over as soon as he heard the news, his eyes blazing with a familiar righteous anger. "They expect you to go quietly, Auntie Sarah, Nita," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury, pacing our small living room like a caged panther. "They always expect us to just roll over, to disappear, to accept their scraps. That's been their strategy for centuries. But what if we don't? What if just this once we refuse to be invisible? What if we show this whole damn city, that we will not be erased without a fight?" The idea of a peaceful, community-based occupation, a visible act of resistance, began to take shape in our desperate conversations. It wasn't about claiming legal ownership of a house we didn't technically own according to their laws. It was about resisting an unjust, predatory eviction. It was about highlighting our plight, our humanity, our deep connection to this home. It was about making a stand, not just for our family, but for all the other families in our neighborhood, in our city, facing similar threats of displacement and cultural erasure at the hands of unchecked gentrification and corporate greed. Our immediate community, when they heard what was happening to us, rallied with a speed, a generosity, and a fierce solidarity that brought tears to my eyes and a lump to my throat. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, friends from the nearby urban Indian center where Shima Sani sometimes taught beadwork, elders from our Diné nation who lived scattered throughout the city, allies from other communities, Latino families from down the street who were also facing rent hikes, progressive students from the local university, members of local housing rights groups. They started showing up at our doorstep. They brought food, pots of stew, bags of groceries, fresh bread. They brought blankets, firewood for the old stove as the nights grew colder, and most importantly, they brought their presence, their voices, their unwavering support, forming a powerful, human shield of solidarity around our vulnerable home. Within a matter of days, our small, patchy front yard and the cracked sidewalk in front of our house were transformed into a vibrant, defiant, and surprisingly well-organized encampment. A couple of small teepees, a powerful symbol of resilience and home for so many Plains nations but adopted here in a spirit of intertribal solidarity, were erected, their canvas cones stark and beautiful against the backdrop of our aging bungalow. Hand-painted banners, created by Ashki and his friends, fluttered in the crisp autumn wind, proclaiming in bold letters, "Yazzie family stays. No more stolen homes. Housing is a human right. Gentrification is colonialism." A sacred fire was kindled in a designated fire pit, tended carefully around the clock by volunteers, its fragrant smoke carrying our prayers, our hopes, our unwavering determination, up to the spirits. Elders from various tribes sat in a circle on folding chairs and blankets, sharing stories, singing traditional songs, their voices a grounding, ancestral force against the harsh, discordant symphony of the city. Children, initially bewildered, soon found joy in the communal atmosphere, their laughter a precious, defiant reminder of what, and who, we were fighting for. Food was shared communally from a makeshift outdoor kitchen. Coffee brewed constantly. Strategies were discussed in hushed, urgent tones late into the night, around the comforting glow of the sacred fire. It was, in its own way, Oseti Sakowin in miniature, a spontaneous, resilient community of resistance blossoming unexpectedly on a quiet residential street in the heart of a gentrifying city. My role, along with Chei and a few other tech-savvy young people who had joined our cause, quickly became that of documenting everything, of becoming the media arm of our small occupation. We used our aging smartphones, a borrowed GoPro camera that one of the university students brought, and an old, donated laptop that often threatened to crash. We live-streamed the morning prayer circles, the powerful drumming sessions that seemed to make the very earth beneath us vibrate. Shima-sani patiently, serenely tending her beloved corn, her weathered face a mask of profound, quiet defiance against the encroaching forces. We interviewed my mother, her voice trembling but clear and strong as she spoke with heartbreaking eloquence of what this home, this community, meant to us, of the profound injustice of Alistair Finch III's callous actions. We documented the incredible outpouring of community support. The owner of the local Latino bakery who dropped off boxes of fresh pan dulce every morning, the non-native neighbors from across the street who brought thermoses of hot soup and coffee on cold evenings, the university students who organized shifts to help maintain the vigil and keep the fire burning. And crucially, with a kind of grim satisfaction, we documented Mr. Alistair Finch III's increasingly erratic and self-damaging reactions. He was, to put it mildly, apoplectic. The unexpected sight of tapies and banners on his newly acquired property, the persistent rhythmic sound of indigenous drumming and singing disrupting the carefully curated tranquility of his investment zone, the arrival of local news crews, drawn by the unusual and visually compelling sight of a full-blown indigenous occupation in a sleepy, gentrifying neighborhood. It clearly wasn't part of his sleek, modernization business plan. His first move was to call the police, repeatedly, claiming we were trespassing, creating a public disturbance, violating noise ordinances. We filmed the officers arriving, sometimes in multiple squad cars, their initial aggressive, almost militarized posture, then their visible discomfort, their human hesitation, as they were confronted not by a violent mob, but by a line of stoic elders singing softly, holding eagle feathers and sprigs of sage. We filmed Chei, calm, articulate, and incredibly brave, respectfully explaining our situation, our rights as long-term tenants facing an unjust eviction, our commitment to peaceful, non-violent resistance. The police, after tense, often prolonged standoffs, usually retreated, clearly unwilling to forcibly remove grandmothers, children, and praying families with multiple news cameras and dozens of citizen journalists live-streaming their every move. That footage, raw and unedited, went viral almost instantly within local activist circles and indigenous social media networks. Finch then escalated, hiring private security guards, a couple of beefy, scowling men in ill-fitting, generic black blazers, who looked more like bouncers from a disreputable nightclub than professional security. They tried to intimidate us, to block access to our home for supporters bringing supplies, to provoke confrontations. We filmed them too, their thuggish, unprofessional behavior, their often overtly racist taunts, a stark, damning contrast to our community's unwavering commitment to peaceful resilience and prayerful action. That footage, too, found a rapidly growing audience online. His most spectacularly self-damaging moment, however, the one that truly tipped the scales, came when he finally, reluctantly, agreed to an on-camera interview with a local independent television station, clearly intending to portray himself as the aggrieved property owner, the innocent victim of professional protesters and unreasonable demands. But under the gentle, yet relentlessly persistent and well-informed questioning of a young, sharp Native American journalist named Sierra Crane, who had been following our story closely from the beginning, Alistair Finch III's carefully constructed composure, his veneer of sophisticated reasonableness, began to visibly, then catastrophically, crack. "These people," he said, gesturing dismissively with a wave of his hand towards our vibrant, prayerful encampment, his voice tight with barely suppressed irritation, the corner of his mouth twitching. "They simply don't understand basic American property rights, the sanctity of contract. This neighborhood, this entire city, is undergoing a necessary and ultimately beneficial revitalization. My investment, our investment, he corrected himself, perhaps remembering his corporate partners, is intended to improve the area, to elevate its profile, to attract a more desirable, a more economically productive class of resident. Their continued presence, this spectacle, this circus, he sputtered, searching for the right dismissive term, is frankly an eyesore, a public nuisance, and demonstrably detrimental to surrounding property values. A different class of resident, Mr. Finch? Sierra Crane pressed, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering. Are you suggesting that the Yazzie family, who have lived in this home for over half a century, who are an integral part of this community's history and fabric, are somehow not desirable or economically productive enough for your vision of this neighborhood? Finch flushed a deep, unbecoming crimson. His carefully coiffed silver hair seemed to bristle. I am saying, he enunciated slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dim-witted child, that this is a straightforward business decision. Sentimentality, personal histories, these things have no place in rational property development or market economics. They were given ample legal notice, more than the law requires. They should simply move on. Find somewhere more appropriate for their particular circumstances and means. Appropriate for their circumstances and means. The coded language, the thinly veiled classism and racism, the utter lack of empathy, it was all there, laid bare for the entire city, and soon the entire world, to hear. That clip, that specific damning exchange, meticulously edited by Chai with clear, prominent subtitles and shared widely, exploded. It didn't just go locally viral, it went nationally, then internationally viral. It became a textbook example of gentrifier arrogance and corporate callousness. The revenge was the sheer, unadulterated, self-inflicted power of his own words, his own undisguised callousness, his own blatant prejudice, being broadcast to the world, unedited, undeniable. He had intended to shame us into leaving, to make us feel small and insignificant. Instead, he had profoundly, irrevocably, and very publicly shamed himself. The outpouring of support after that interview aired was overwhelming, a tidal wave of solidarity. A prominent National Legal Aid Society, their top housing rights lawyer, a formidable, no-nonsense Diné woman named Toikan Bitsi, took on our case pro bono, bringing with her a team of brilliant young attorneys and paralegals. A crowdfunding campaign, started by an anonymous supporter who turned out to be a famous musician with a strong social conscience, raised enough money to cover any potential moving expenses tenfold, though we were more determined than ever not to move. National and international indigenous rights organizations issued powerful statements of solidarity, condemning Finch's actions and Sterling Peak Properties' predatory practices. Petitions demanding that Finch reverse the eviction and negotiate in good faith garnered hundreds of thousands, then millions, of signatures from around the globe. People, inspired by our stand, started organizing solidarity protests outside Sterling Peak Properties' corporate headquarters in another state. His other development projects, we heard, began to face new scrutiny, new community opposition, new questions from investors. Alistair Finch III, once a faceless corporate entity, became the very public, very reviled poster child for predatory gentrification and anti-Indigenous racism. The pressure, legal, financial, political, and profoundly public, became unbearable for Alistair Finch III and Sterling Peak Properties. His brand, his carefully cultivated image as a sophisticated urban developer, was being irreparably tarnished. His investors, we were told through back channels, were getting extremely nervous, threatening to pull funding. The final act of this particular drama came not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in a series of tense, quiet meetings brokered by city officials, including the mayor, who were themselves now under intense public and media pressure to resolve the Sycamore Street spectacle peacefully and justly. Finch, when he finally agreed to meet with us directly, looked haggard, diminished, profoundly defeated. His expensive suit now seemed like an ill-fitting costume he couldn't wait to shed. He sat across the polished table from my mother, from Shima-Sani, who attended every meeting, a silent, powerful matriarchal presence, from Toikan Bitsi, our formidable lawyer, and from me. There were no heartfelt apologies, not really, just a series of grudging, lawyer-vetted acknowledgments of the unforeseen complexities of the situation, and certain public misinterpretations of his company's intentions. But the tangible outcome, the victory, was what mattered most. The eviction notice was formally, legally, irrevocably rescinded. Furthermore, after much hard-nosed negotiation by Toikan, Finch agreed to offer our family a new, legally binding long-term lease at our current rent, with only modest, legally regulated annual increases tied directly to inflation, for as long as Shima-Sani, or any of her direct descendants currently residing in the home, wished to live there. He even, in a move that surprised everyone, agreed to fund some much-needed, long-deferred repairs to the house. A new roof, updated plumbing, energy-efficient windows, perhaps as a desperate last-ditch attempt to salvage some tiny shred of his shattered public image. Or perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of genuine remorse had managed to penetrate his corporate armor. We had won. Our home, our sanctuary, our connection to this place was safe. The day we finally, ceremonially, took down the typies, doused the sacred fire with heartfelt prayers of gratitude to the ancestors, and to all who had supported us, and shared a final joyful feast with our incredible community of supporters, in our small, beloved backyard. The blue corn in Shima-Sani's garden, now tall and heavy with ripening ears, stood more proudly, its leaves a more vibrant, defiant green, more luminous than I had ever seen it. It was as if the earth itself, our mother, was celebrating with us, breathing a sigh of relief. The revenge, as I understood it then, and as I understand it now, was never about hatred, never about causing Alistair Finch III personal suffering beyond the considerable, self-inflicted damage he'd done to his own reputation and his company's bottom line. It was about the profound, cleansing, transformative power of truth, when amplified by unwavering community action and the unblinking eye of public scrutiny. It was about resilience, about refusing to be invisible, about asserting our inherent human right to home, to dignity, to exist with honor in the places we belong. It was about the shame of displacement, of prejudice, being placed squarely where it belonged, not on the shoulders of the dispossessed, the marginalized, but on those of the dispossessor, the arrogant, the greedy. Life on Sycamore Street eventually returned to a new kind of normal, a normal forever changed, forever strengthened by our shared struggle. The viral spotlight, as it always does, eventually faded, moving on to the next crisis, the next outrage. But something had irrevocably shifted, both within our family and within our wider community. We had faced down a powerful, prejudiced, and seemingly insurmountable force, and we had, against all odds, with the help of so many, prevailed. We had shown that even a struggling, working-class Diné family, armed with their history, their culture, their community, and the often underestimated power of a smartphone camera and a shared story, could force a reckoning, could demand and achieve a measure of justice. The fight against gentrification, against housing insecurity, against the insidious, systemic injustices that continue to plague indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities in cities across Turtle Island, is far from over. It is a daily battle, waged on many fronts. But in our small, beloved corner of the world, under a crimson sky often claimed by city dust and suburban sprawl, a patch of sacred blue corn continues to grow, its roots running deeper than any concrete, a living, breathing symbol of our enduring presence, our unbreakable connection to place, and the quiet, powerful, irrefutable truth that sometimes the most profound victories, the most meaningful acts of revenge, are won not by leaving, not by surrendering, but by staying, by standing your ground, by simply, stubbornly, beautifully, refusing to be erased. And that, in the ancient sacred language of our Diné ancestors, is the purest, most resonant form of Hojo. It is walking in beauty, even when the path is paved with stones.